Our main goals when working on woodworking machines are to work safely, get accurate results, and hopefully not be stressed out the entire time we're on the machine. So in this lesson, we're going to look at a framework of 3 simple concepts that are going to help us be more comfortable and work safely and possibly even enjoy yourself on a machine. The first element in this framework is machines. We have to understand what are the forces at work, how is the wood being affected in that machine, and also what are the machine's reference surfaces, those parts of the machine that we line up the wood against in order to get a straight, accurate cut. The second part in our framework is the workpiece. That's the piece of wood we're putting through the machine. So we need to understand the properties of wood, grain direction, it's the hardness of the wood. We also want to know if there's anything in particular about that piece of wood that we need to be concerned about, such as a loose knot or perhaps some moisture content in the wood. And the third part is the operator, that's us. What are we doing to counteract the forces that the machine is putting on the wood? Where should our hands be? Where should we be standing? And where should our attention and focus be during this operation? Let's look at the example of making a rip cut on the table saw. First question we're going to ask ourselves is, what are the forces at work with this machine? Here we know that the blade is spinning towards us, so that leads us to also know that we have to push the wood through this cut and counteract that force. Second thing about the machine we're going to ask is, what is the reference surface? In a rip cut, it's always the rip fence. We have to run our good clean edge against the rip fence in order for it to make a parallel cut on the outer edge of the wood. Okay, that takes care of the machine questions. Now, what about the wood itself? Let's take a look. We already know that we need a flat square edge against the reference surface. The other thing to know about the wood is, are we cutting into a very thick piece of wood? Do we have to account for maybe moisture content being different inside? Are there any knots in the wood? Is there any particular thing about the piece that we're cutting that we need to be aware of that might affect the cut or its results? The third set of questions then is, where am I standing? What are my hands doing? Where should my attention be? So based on what we've just gone over, we know this is the reference surface. That means we have to apply pressure on the reference surface throughout the time that this piece is getting cut. That will lead to and reinforce the proper technique, getting us an accurate result and also a safe operation. We have 2 different scenarios on the jointer because you can use this machine to either joint a face or an edge. Let's look at jointing a face first. That's when we place the board flat on the infeed table, end up on the outfeed table. It helps to understand a little bit about how this machine works in order to understand the reference surfaces. We have a spinning cutter head in the middle of the infeed and outfeed table. The cutter head and the outfeed table are at the same height, and we adjust the infeed table lower than these two in order to cut off a certain amount. It's that simple. So this is a little tricky though. What is the reference surface? If we're starting out with a rough board on this side, the reference surface can't be the infeed table. What happens when we go over the blade? We're skimming it a little bit and we end up with a smooth, flat surface on the outfeed table. So in this case, it's not so obvious, but the outfeed table is the reference surface. So that's where we want to be putting pressure. We're going to be pressing down a little bit as the board ends up on the outfeed table, not on the knives, not on the infeed table, only on the outfeed table. We end up over here at the new height and we have a jointed face. Okay, but what about the edges? To do an edge on the joiner, we have to take advantage of its fence. The fence is now the reference surface. So we're going to pull that forward, and knowing that the fence is the reference surface, that means we have to keep pressure against the fence while the board is being cut. It passes over the blades, ends up, again, skimmed a little bit at the new height. That is when the outfeed table also becomes a reference surface. So at that point, we have to be doing 2 things at once, pressing down and also pressing into the fence to complete this cut. In the middle of the planer, there's a cutter head that's spinning towards us, coming over and under on top of the wood. So we know the forces are pushing back at us like most machines. However, in this case, the planer has its own feed rollers that are grabbing the wood and pushing it through. So we really don't have to do much as an operator of this machine. But one thing we do want to understand is the reference surfaces and also the wood itself. So let's take a look. The reference surface on this machine is just the bed itself. That should tell you that we need to have a perfectly flat face on the reference surface that then gets matched on the top surface by the blade. So like I said, as the operator, we don't have to do much, we just have to feed it in. But we do want to understand a little bit about the wood. We need to understand wood grain so that we don't get tear out on the surface that it's cutting. So that's one aspect of using the planer where that's something to know about the wood. You also want to know that there's not loose knots in the wood or other things that are going to come free as it's being planed. So again, it's just understanding the machine's forces, its beds, understanding a little bit about the wood and what's going to happen to it, and also then what we have to do to get this operation done.